My stepmother tried to erase my real mother from family history, so I erased her from the family fortune. Growing up, I thought I had a normal family situation until I turned 16, and everything started falling apart like dominoes. My mom died when I was 8, and my dad remarried 2 years later to this woman who seemed nice enough at first. She had this sweet voice and would always bring me cookies from the bakery downtown, the kind with the rainbow sprinkles that I loved as a kid. But looking back now, I realize those cookies were probably just bribery to make me like her. The first red flag should have been when she started redecorating our house immediately after the wedding. She claimed she wanted to make it feel more like home for everyone, but what she really meant was erasing every trace of my mother's existence. The family photos that used to line the hallway got mysteriously replaced with generic landscape paintings. My mother's favorite blue curtains in the living room suddenly became beige ones that matched nothing. Even her garden out back got completely torn up and replaced with some boring grass and a few bushes. I was too young to understand what was happening at the time, but I remember feeling this strange emptiness in the house. It was like walking into a hotel room instead of the home where I grew up. My stepmother would always have some excuse ready when I asked about missing items. The photo albums were being reorganized, she said. My mother's jewelry was being cleaned and would be back soon. Her books were donated to charity because they were taking up too much space. Each lie felt reasonable enough for a confused kid to accept. My dad seemed oblivious to what was happening, or maybe he just didn't want to deal with it. He worked long hours and traveled frequently, so he was rarely home to see the gradual transformation. When he was around, my stepmother would put on this perfect wife act, making his favorite meals and laughing at all his jokes. She was smart about it, never doing anything dramatic that would wake him up to her true nature. The worst part was how she started telling people that I was her biological son. At school events, parent-teacher conferences, even at the grocery store, she would introduce herself as my mother without any qualification. When people would comment on how I looked nothing like her, she would laugh it off and say I took after my father's side of the family. It made my stomach turn every time, but I was just a kid who didn't know how to speak up. By the time I was in high school, I had almost given up on preserving my mother's memory. My stepmother had been so thorough in her erasure campaign that I sometimes wondered if I was imagining things. Maybe my memories of my real mother were just fantasies I had created to cope with losing her. The house felt completely foreign to me, like I was living in someone else's life. Then one day when I was 17, I was helping my dad clean out the garage when I found something that changed everything. Hidden behind some old paint cans in the very back corner was a dusty cardboard box with my mother's name written on it in her own handwriting. My hands were shaking as I opened it, and inside I found dozens of letters she had written to me before she died. They were arranged by date, starting from right after my birth and continuing until just weeks before her death. Reading those letters was like having my mother speak to me from beyond the grave. She wrote about her hopes for my future, funny stories about my childhood that I had almost forgotten, and most importantly, she wrote about how much she loved me. In one letter, she mentioned that she had been documenting our family history in a special journal because she wanted me to know where I came from. She had hidden it somewhere safe, she wrote, where only I would think to look. It took me 3 days of searching before I found the journal tucked inside an old cookbook that had belonged to my grandmother. My stepmother had probably never opened it because she didn't cook from scratch, preferring to order takeout or heat up frozen meals. The journal contained not just our family history, but also detailed information about my mother's assets and investments that my father had never mentioned. Apparently, my mother had been much more financially savvy than anyone realized. She had invested in several properties and had a substantial portfolio of stocks and bonds. According to the journal, she had set up a trust fund for me that was supposed to become accessible when I turned 18. She had also left specific instructions about her personal belongings, including jewelry and artwork that were meant to be mine. When I confronted my father about the trust fund, he looked genuinely surprised. He admitted that my stepmother had been handling most of the financial paperwork since they got married, and he had assumed she was taking care of everything properly. It turns out she had been intercepting the statements and had somehow managed to redirect the funds into accounts she controlled. She had essentially stolen my inheritance while convincing my father that she was being helpful. The confrontation with my stepmother was explosive. When presented with the evidence, she didn't even try to deny it at first. Instead, she launched into this bizarre justification about how she had been more of a mother to me than my real mother ever was. She claimed she deserved compensation for raising me, as if love and care were services that required payment. She had convinced herself that taking my mother's place meant taking her assets too. But then she made a crucial mistake. In her anger, she revealed that she had been systematically selling off my mother's jewelry and artwork over the years. Some pieces had been sold to pay for her expensive shopping habits, while others had been given to her sister as gifts. She had treated my mother's precious belongings like they were just random items at a garage sale. What she didn't know was that I had been recording our conversation on my phone. I had learned not to trust her completely, and something told me I might need proof of what she was saying. Her admission about selling my mother's belongings was exactly the evidence I needed to take legal action against her. The legal battle lasted 8 months, but it was worth every penny of the attorney fees. Not only did I recover most of my original inheritance, but I also was awarded damages for the emotional distress and the value of the stolen items. My stepmother was forced to provide an accounting of every asset she had taken, and she had to pay restitution for everything she couldn't return. But the real victory came when I discovered something else in my mother's papers. She had been secretly recording conversations with my father before she died, and in one of them, she had expressed concerns about what would happen to me if he remarried. She had actually set up a secondary trust fund with very specific conditions designed to protect me from exactly the kind of manipulation my stepmother had attempted. This secondary trust was managed by a law firm that my stepmother knew nothing about. It contained not just money, but also detailed instructions about my mother's wishes for my upbringing and education. She had essentially created a safety net from beyond the grave, knowing that someone might try to take advantage of me after she was gone. The most shocking revelation came when the lawyers discovered that my stepmother had been planning her scheme long before she even married my father. She had researched our family's financial situation and had specifically targeted my father because she knew about my mother's assets. She had been playing a long game, pretending to love both of us while secretly planning to rob me of my inheritance. Armed with this information, I was able to not only recover my stolen inheritance, but also expose my stepmother's true nature to everyone who had been fooled by her act. My father was devastated to learn how badly he had been manipulated, but he supported me completely once he understood what had happened. He filed for divorce immediately and made sure she couldn't claim any part of his assets either. The story doesn't end there, though. While going through the legal process, I discovered that my stepmother had been running similar schemes with other widowed men in our area. She had a pattern of targeting recent widowers with substantial assets and children who were too young to protect themselves. I wasn't her first victim, just her most successful one. Working with the attorneys, I was able to help expose her to the other families she had targeted. 3 other men came forward with similar stories of missing assets and suspicious financial activity. It turned out she had been operating what was essentially a small-scale criminal enterprise, moving from one family to another and systematically stealing from grieving children. The final twist came when we discovered that she had been using my mother's identity to open credit cards and take out loans. She had kept some of my mother's personal documents and had been using them to commit identity theft for years. This added federal charges to her legal troubles and ensured that she would face serious consequences for her actions. When everything was settled, I had recovered not just my original inheritance, but also additional compensation from the criminal restitution. I used part of the money to restore our family home to the way it was when my mother was alive. I found the original paint colors, tracked down similar furniture, and even managed to locate some of the family photos that had been sold or given away. The most meaningful moment was when I finally found my mother's wedding ring, which my stepmother had sold to a pawn shop across town. The shop owner remembered her because she had seemed nervous and had claimed it was her grandmother's ring. When I showed him the photos and explained the situation, he was happy to sell it back to me for the same price he had paid her. Now, 5 years later, I live in the house where I grew up, surrounded by reminders of my real mother's love. I've framed some of her letters and hung them in the hallway where her photos used to be. The garden out back has been restored to match her original design, and I've even learned to take care of the rose bushes she planted when I was a baby. My stepmother is serving time in federal prison for identity theft and fraud. She tried to appeal her sentence, claiming she had been driven to desperation by financial hardship, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. The evidence of her calculated manipulation and the impact on multiple families made it clear that this wasn't a crime of necessity, but of greed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never found that box in the garage. My stepmother might have succeeded in completely erasing my mother from my life and stealing everything she had left for me. But my mother's love was stronger than her schemes, and even death couldn't break the bond between us. The experience taught me that family isn't just about blood relations, but it's also not about legal papers or living arrangements. Real family is about love, respect, and protecting each other. My stepmother never understood that, and that's ultimately why she failed. She thought she could buy love and loyalty, but she ended up losing everything instead. Looking back, I realized my mother had been preparing me for this battle my entire life. Through her letters and her careful planning, she had given me the tools I needed to fight back when the time came. She couldn't be there to protect me in person, but she found a way to be there in spirit, guiding me through the darkest period of my life. Today, I work with families who have been through similar situations. There are more people like my stepmother out there than most people realize, and they often target the most vulnerable families. By sharing my story and helping others recognize the warning signs, I hope to prevent other children from going through what I experienced. The house feels like home again, filled with memories of my real mother and the love she left behind. My stepmother tried to erase her from our family history, but instead, she erased herself from our family fortune and our lives. Justice has a way of working out in the end, even when it takes longer than we'd like. Every time I look at my mother's restored garden or read one of her letters, I'm reminded that love really is stronger than greed. My stepmother spent years trying to take my mother's place, but she never understood that some things can't be stolen or replaced. My mother's love for me was real, and that made all the difference in the end.